Significant player characters of the home campaign. While many players participating in the Gygax and Kuntz home campaign were occasional players, sometimes not even naming their characters, others played far more frequently, and several of their characters became well known to the general gaming world before publication of the Greyhawk campaign setting. Some of these characters became known when Gygax mentioned them in his various columns, interviews, and publications. In other cases, when Gygax created a new magical spell for the game, he would sometimes use the name of a wizard character from his home campaign to add verisimilitude to the spell name, such as Melf's Acid Arrow, Melf being a character created by his son Luke. Some of the characters who became synonymous with Greyhawk at that time included Merlind. Gary Gygax's friend Don Kay created Merlind for the second ever session of Gygax's Greyhawk campaign in 1972. Gygax later recalled that Merlind was the first attempt by a player to make a creative name for a character. In the early days, most players, including Gygax himself, simply used their own name as a basis for their character's name. For example, Gary was Urag, etc. According to Robert Kuntz, Merlin did not get his trademark six-shooters in actual play, but they were given to the character in tribute to Don Kay's love of the Western genre. Although Gygax did not allow the use of gunpowder in his Greyhawk setting, he made a loophole for Don Kay by ruling that Merlin actually carried two magical wands that made loud noises and delivered small but deadly missiles. His name is used for the unearthed arcana item, Merlin's Spoon. Robilar. Robilar was a fighter belonging to Rob Kuntz. Like Merlin, Robilar was also created for the second ever session beneath Castle Greyhawk in 1972. Rolled up on Gygax's kitchen table. Gygax suggested to Kuntz the name of Robilar after a minor character in Gygax's novella, The Gnome Caché. Because Kuntz was a constant player, Robilar rapidly gained power and possessions. As the city of Greyhawk was developed, he also became the secret owner of the Green Dragon Inn in the city of Greyhawk, where he kept tabs on happenings in the city. Kuntz quickly grew impatient with play when it involved more than a couple of players, and often played solo adventures one-on-one with Gygax. Robilar was not only the first to reach the 13th and bottom level of Gygax's Greyhawk dungeons, but on the way, he was also responsible for freeing 9 demigods whom Gygax revived a decade later as some of the first deities of Greyhawk. Iuz, Relishaz, Tricerion, Erethnul, Oladamara, Eronius, Celestian, Hexter, and Obed High. Robilar was also the first to enter Gygax's Temple of Elemental Evil and conquered it completely. Robilar also freed the demoness Zuktimoy from her prison at the center of the temple. Kuntz later related that Gygax was very dismayed that his masterpiece dungeon had been destroyed by a single adventurer, and as punishment, Gygax had an army pursue Robilar back to his castle, which he had to abandon. Robilar also lost possession of the Green Dragon Inn. Tensor. Tensor was a wizard played by Gygax's son Ernie. In the earliest days of Greyhawk, Ernie often gamed with Rob Kuntz, Robilar, and Terry Kuntz, Tarek. At one point, using their combined forces of loyal henchmen, the three controlled access to the first level of the Greyhawk dungeons while they ransacked the lower levels. Tensor became the second character to reach the 13th and bottom at the time level of the Greyhawk dungeons when he noticed that Robilar was missing and went in search of him. Gary Gygax included the name Tensor in the names of 2 spells, Tensor's Floating Disc and Tensor's Transformation. Tarek, or Tarek with a C, was a character created by Terry Kuntz. Tarek often adventured with Tensor and Robilar in the days when the three controlled the first level of the dungeons of Greyhawk. Tarek became the third and last character to reach the bottom level of Gygax's original Greyhawk dungeon when he noticed Robilar and Tensor were missing and went in search of them. Iraq's cousin. Gary Gygax's son Ernie originally had a character he called Iraq. Later, he created a wizard who, due to a personal issue as part of his backstory, refused to reveal his name, simply referring to himself as Iraq's cousin. Gary Gygax knew that Ernie liked the Bars Room stories of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and at one point transported Iraq's cousin to a Barsoom-like Mars, where the inhabitants refused to let the wizard use magic. Iraq's cousin was forced to become a fighter instead, and learned to fight proficiently with two weapons simultaneously. Eventually, he was able to teleport back to Oath, but when he acquired two Vorpal blades, Rob Kuntz and Gary Gygax decided he had become too powerful and lured him into a demon's clutches. The demon took him to an alternative plane that drained the magic from the Vorpal blades, destroying them. Urag. After Gygax made Kuntz as a co-DM, this fighter was Gygax's first character, and Gygax often referred to Urag's various adventures in columns and interviews. Irag? Irag is simply Gary spelled backwards. Mordenkainen. This was perhaps Gygax's most famous character, and also his favorite. Mordenkainen was created in early 1973, and his name was drawn from Finnish mythology. Due to constant play, often with Rob Kuntz's DM, Gygax advanced Mordenkainen into a powerful character. Gygax never revealed exactly how powerful Mordenkainen was, simply stating that the wizard had 20-something levels. Even years after he last played Mordenkainen, he would not disclose any of Mordenkainen's powers or possessions. Various spells from First Edition bear his name, such as Mordenkainen's Faithful Hound, Mordenkainen's Lucubration, and Mordenkainen's Sword. I thought it was going to say lubrication. Bigby. Bigby started life as an evil, low-level wizard non-player character in Rob Kuntz's Dungeons of Greyhawk. Gary Gygax, playing Mordenkainen, managed to subdue him and forced Bigby to become his servant. After a long time and several adventures, Mordenkainen managed to convince Bigby to leave his evil ways behind, and Kuntz ruled that Bigby had changed from an enemy to a loyal henchman, and therefore Gygax could take over Bigby as a player character. Thereafter, Gygax developed Bigby into a powerful wizard, second only to Mordenkainen, and used his name to describe a series of hand spells. For example, Bigby's Crushing Hand and Bigby's Grasping Hand. For a time after this, Rob Kuntz ruled that all the names of Mordenkainen's future henchmen had to rhyme with Bigby. This resulted in Zigby the Dwarf, Rigby the Cleric, Sigby Grigbyson the Fighter, Bigby's apprentice Nigby, and Digby, Mordenkainen's new apprentice who replaced Bigby. That's pretty funny. Melf was an elven character created by Gary Gygax's son Luke. Gary Gygax borrowed Melf's name for the spell Melf's Acid Arrow. Rary. Rary was a wizard created by Brian Bloom and played only until he reached the 3rd level, at which point Bloom retired him, having reached his objective, which was to be able to call his character Medium Rary. How stupid. Gygax borrowed the name for the spells Rary's mnemonic enhancer, and Rary's telepathic bond. Brian Bloom was, of course, the guy who originally put up $2,000 to officially publish D&D in the first place, and then ended up part of the company, and then things went down the drain from there. Otto, like Bigby, started life as an evil non-player character wizard in the dungeons of Greyhawk. Tensor and Robilar defeated him in combat, and when given a choice of which master to serve, Otto chose to serve Robilar, thereby becoming a character controlled by Robilar's creator, Rob Kuntz. Thereafter, Otto accompanied Robilar on many adventures, including Robilar's destruction of the Temple of Elemental Evil. Gary Gygax borrowed Otto's name for the spell Otto's Irresistible Dance. Drawmidge. Drawmidge was a wizard created by Jim Ward. Drawmidge is simply his name spelled backwards. Gygax borrowed Drawmidge's name for the magical spell Drawmidge's Instant Summons. The Circle of Eight. At the point where Gygax's own characters in the Greyhawk home campaign had collectively accumulated both enough wealth that they couldn't easily spend it, and a standing army that rivaled most nations' forces, he gathered all 8 of the characters: Mordenkainen, Wizard; Urag, Fighter; Bigby, Wizard; Rigby, Cleric; Zigby, Dwarf; Felnorith, Fighter; Vram, Elf; and Vin, Elf, together as a circle of 8. Pooling their resources, Gygax had the 8 construct a stronghold in the middle of an evil land, so they would not have to travel far to find adventure. After 3 years of game time, the result was the Obsidian Citadel, an octagonal castle which housed the Circle of 8 and their armies. After Gygax was ousted from TSR, thanks to that Bloomberg guy, or whatever his name is, Carl Sargent and Rick Rose remolded Gygax's old Circle of 8 in the City of Greyhawk boxed set into a new plot device. Instead of a group of 8 companions belonging to Gygax, who sallied forth from an impregnable bastion to fight evil, the circle became 8 wizards brought together by Gygax's own creation, now owned by TSR, Mordenkainen. Game designer Ken Rolston described this new Circle of 8 as a powerful and influential local organization of wizards. Wolfgang Bauer found the Circle of 8 a small but knowledgeable organization, central to the mythos of the Greyhawk setting, with all its members being important. Alright, that's the end of part 2.